Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Insomnia Podcast. I'm your host, Leo, and I hope you're enjoying your current night. Just before we get started, I want to remind everybody that I do now have my own Reddit, our subreddit, more specifically, r/sleepless_nights. If you have horror stories of your own, or horror-related art, music, anything else that you would like to see on that subreddit, please go ahead and check it out, subscribe to it, and post whatever you feel. I also want to let you all know that I have my own Patreon that is currently set up. That is patreon.com/sleepless_nights. If you enjoy what I do and you want to support me, I would gladly appreciate anything you guys want to donate. Don't feel required to, though, because at the end of the day, if you're here and you're watching and you're listening, then you're already doing a lot for me, and I appreciate all of you. Other than that, I think it's time to begin our first story. Today we're going to be reading a variety of stories from the deep web. Those of you who don't know, the deep web is a darker portion of the internet that's only accessible through certain special procedures, certain specific programs. And the deep web can house a lot of disturbing content. So sit back, relax, and enjoy another sleepless night. Let's begin. So, like every other edgy, bored teenager during the peak years of internet freedom, I got myself into some stuff, and it was stuff I had no business poking around in. People talk about the glory days when internet anonymity was real and you could do all kinds of illegal things, but those people are full of shit. Anonymity, online or otherwise, is a fucking joke. I learned that the hard way the summer I graduated high school. I was held back in the 3rd grade after a really serious illness kept me hospitalized for almost 6 months, so my friends graduated the year before me. Senior year sucked. I was alone, and it was too late to make new friends. So I skipped a lot of classes and spent most of my time online, playing games and talking to my friends through AIM. It was actually a really dark period of my life that I try not to think about too much, because I haven't ever tried to repeat my deep web exploration, and I've forgotten a lot of the stuff I did. I do remember, though, that it was my friend Brian who got me into deep web exploration. We were all obsessed with 4chan. /B/ specifically, or the B-board. And an Anon taught him how to use Tor safely. He'd been mentioning it for a while, and I got curious. I asked him about it, and he made it sound like a utopia for people like us, who were tech-savvy and, well, nerdy. You could find anything, he said. Any porn you could imagine was yours for the viewing. There were sites offering drugs which you could purchase and have delivered anywhere in the world. He'd been part of a few raids too, and I admit it all sounded like a lot of fun. So I downloaded Tor, and he taught me how to access the hidden wiki and some other neat sites. It ended up taking over my life. It was like being a kid in a candy store. Suddenly, I had access to unlimited movies, games, porn, information of any kind. I stayed away from the really nasty sites, like Violent Desires, and anything that had even the slightest hint of containing child porn. Of course, it's impossible to avoid that kind of thing down there, and I saw a fair share. If I'm being honest, it never bothered me much. Neither did all of the very graphic gore. I'm not ill-adjusted or anything, but I've never liked kids much, and I'd long since been desensitized by gore. I made it a point to report what I could and move on, but it never stuck with me. After the school year ended, I had 3 months to pass before going off to college, and I basically became a shut-in. I spent almost all my time hopping from site to site, seeing what was down there. Most of it was just back doors to existing sites, but it was still fun to fuck around with things and be a general asshole. I still talked to my friends, but they'd moved on to World of Warcraft, and Brian in particular spent less time on the deep web than I did. However, one evening he messaged me and told me he'd found a way to view sites based on location. I have no idea how he did this, and if he told me, I quickly forgot. I assume it was some kind of script, but maybe that's not right. Either way, he showed me how to use it, and I started poking around sites that were registered in my state. Most weren't anywhere close to me, so I was just opening tabs, browsing quickly, and moving on. Eventually, I came across a site that was registered to someone about 2 hours from me, and I opened the page. Whoever had created the site didn't know much about design. The layout was wonky and incredibly ugly. It took me a while to figure out how to navigate around. The links were the same color as the background, which was just a black screen with the words #1 devotee repeating over and over. And highlighting had been disabled, so I had to tab to find any of the links. One took me to a chat that was very active, people posting every couple of seconds. The usernames were all generic male names like Brad or Tim, and they were all talking about someone they called perfection. It was really bizarre. I read the chat for a while, and literally all anyone wanted to talk about was how amazing perfection was, and how they admired everything he did. I wondered if I'd come across some kind of weird community that idolized a celebrity. It made me laugh a little, so I kept poking around while keeping the chat open in a separate window. One link led to a bunch of sound clips that were about 30 seconds in length. After listening to a few, I realized they were all just random sounds. A car door shutting, a toilet flushing, the sound of a man clearing his throat, typing. One was of terrible quality, but I could make out a baby fussing. Holy shit, these people were really dedicated. I imagine one of the members creeping up to the house of whoever it was, and they were obsessed with and recording any sound they could and bringing it back to the community like a treasure. I tried to figure out who Perfection was, but it was strange. His real name was never mentioned anywhere. I looked. Another link took me to some kind of digital archive that contained file downloads. Warily, I clicked on one, and I downloaded it. It opened up a document that was almost 500 pages long, and seemed to be some kind of novel about growing up with Perfection. I only scanned it, but the general gist seemed to be that Perfection and the narrator were obsessed with each other. It read like any awful fanfiction. I closed it and downloaded another file. This one contained what looked like hand-drawn blueprints for a house, with the rooms labeled things like our studio and second kitchen for quarantined food. The latter struck me because I'm a celiac, and I know all about quarantining food. Whoever it was, they had some kind of allergy too. Other documents contained inventories of strange items, like Q-tips, clean and dirty, fruit rinds, cups, bits of fabric, and used tissues. I was starting to get really skeeved out. Whoever these people were, they took their obsession a little too seriously for my taste. There was even a forum dedicated to Perfection. This forum had thousands of threads and even more replies, all having to do with this one person. It was overwhelming in a way. I opened another link, which led me to a gallery of photos. I checked the chat and found, to my surprise, that it had stopped completely. No new messages had been posted in at least 5 minutes. I felt a pang of paranoia. Did they know I was here? Would they be angry? I typed a quick, "Hello, just browsing, don't mind me," in the chat box and went back to the gallery. A little ding signaled a reply, but I ignored it and waited for the first image to load. It was a very grainy shot of a woman with a baby. They were exiting a hospital, the woman in a wheelchair. She looked down onto the baby's face as the nurse pushed her toward the curb. The woman was familiar, but I couldn't place her, and the photo was of such poor quality, it was impossible to make out any defining features. The next photo showed the same woman and child playing in their living room. The baby was on its back, reaching up towards a hanging toy. Every woman was featured less and less. Every photo I opened was of the woman and baby, but I noticed as the series went on, the baby began to age and the woman was featured less and less. And some of the photos were incredibly strange. Some were zoomed in on the items the child was holding, almost to the point of being completely out of focus. Others were of footprints or broken branches. One was of a used potty chair, almost like the one I'd had as a kid, and it had been taken outside onto the lawn. Whoever was taking the photo was holding a piece of stool in their hand. That's when I really started to get unnerved. Clearly, the community that ran this site was obsessed to the point of madness about this person, Perfection, and suddenly I didn't want to be a part of it anymore. I closed the window and the chat pinged again. This time, I checked it. "Are you proud of this world?" The message was from a user named Steve. I frowned and typed back, "What? You must be so proud. What do you think?" I had no idea what to say. I hesitated. They typed another message. "It's okay, don't be shy. My house is your house. Look around. It's something. You guys are really obsessed with this guy. There was a brief pause. Who is he anyway? Another user replied this time. Someone named Bob. He is perfection. He is God. I live my life to serve him so that one day he may grace me with his approval. This world is far too filthy for him. I must continue to create our utopia. These people were fucking crazy. Clearly I'd stumbled on some kind of community of superfans, and I felt a little angry. How do you know he even wants you guys to do this? This is a pretty huge invasion of privacy. Someone else replied, Terry. We are in love. Those who keep us apart will be destroyed. I typed faster. He doesn't even know who any of you are, fucking idiots. Get a grip. The whole self-insert thing is cringy enough, but this is all so fucking over the top. Steve replied again. What have I done to upset you? Nothing. I just think it's fucking weird that a bunch of random people have been apparently spying on someone and stealing their photos and stuff. There is only room for the two of us. The message caught me off guard, but before I could reply, every user I'd been talking to replied simultaneously. Are you proud of me? I felt a weird wiggling in my gut. Something was wrong. Does this house suit your needs? Perfection? I started to type back, but it was like someone struck the back of my head with a hammer. My heart was hammering as I reopened the gallery of photos. The hospital photo was grainy, but suddenly the woman came into focus, and I made a choked sound of alarm. I scrolled to the bottom of the gallery and opened the newest photo, which had been posted only an hour before. It was of a closed door in a hallway, light seeping under the door and illuminating the walls just enough to see my framed Batman poster and the distinctive paint smear above the doorknob, where I'd brushed wet paint with a roller by mistake the year before. I frantically pored over the item catalog and found the listings for the red sweatshirt I'd lost as a toddler. I'd found the stuffed toys I'd thrown out or donated over the years, the condoms I'd flushed down the toilet in 9th grade, the 20 pounds of feces taken out of our septic tank and contained in a large plastic drum. I found my 8th grade report card and the Valentine I'd thrown in the gutter that same year out of crippling anxiety. The chat pinged again. I love you more than you will ever know. You are my perfection. I sat numbly as messages began spamming the chat, all from different users. I love you. You are God. I will never leave you. Perfection. Perfection. Love you. My Lord and Savior. Never leave you. I ripped the power cord out of the wall and flew out of my chair. I closed every curtain in the house and locked every door. I opened every cupboard and closet and looked under every piece of furniture until I was sure I was alone. And then I curled up under a blanket in the farthest, darkest corner of my closet and went to sleep out of some kind of shock response. When I woke up, I took my computer apart. And I buried it in the woods behind my house. I told my parents it had suffered a fatal short circuit and had caught fire. They bought me a new laptop, but I could only bring myself to use it when the internet was disabled. I never found out who Devotee was. I've developed agoraphobia, and I rarely leave my apartment. It's been almost 5 years, but I still take my trash to the dump and have it incinerated. When I do go out in public, I wear large hats and sunglasses. I do everything I can to blend in and stay under the radar. My computer was unearthed and taken from its grave, but I'm not sure when. I hope I never find out. I still panic whenever things around the house go missing. The shadow web. I see a lot of people interested in the deep web these days, mainly teens. People talking about red doors and many other alternative names to things they think are real but haven't seen themselves. People question it every day. Are these red door events real? Do they really happen? They're very real indeed. Unfortunately, people with sick minds who get off on torture and other abnormally things go searching for these red doors. When they find them, they dish out great amounts of money just to control the show. The shows are usually hosted by someone from the Middle Eastern portion of the world. It's always a dark-skinned person hosting the show, with their faces covered by a cloth or mask. Oops. The hosts always seem to be in a pissed-off, demanding mood, and always seem to be under the influence of some type of drug or booze. I'm going to tell you the experience I had once, when going deep into the deep end of the deep web. Some of you may have heard of it, but can't get there. You can't get there with Tor. Tor is infested with law enforcement. Red doors won't show up on the Onion anymore like they used to. The only way you can get to see a red door is through Shadow Web. And to get to the Shadow Web, you need an anonymous server, which is called Skix. It's like the new Tor, but without the law enforcement. The world is a much more cruel place nowadays in the cyber world. As a recently retired FBI agent who specialized in cyber crimes all around the world, I'm here to share a story of what I saw on one of my last cases before I retired. The case was never closed and got passed to an agent who replaced me. This was 4 months ago. I was working on a case that had been opened up through an anonymous complaint we had received online. The complaint was lengthy, and in detail described and mentioned many acts of torture beyond what I had seen in my time with the agency. The tipster had sent screenshots of what he or she had seen one night while digging deep into the deep web. They explained how they had been a regular on the deep web, but how everything was dying out due to law enforcement that wanted to dig deeper. So they found the Shadow Web. The process of becoming a member of the Shadow Web was lengthy. The person claimed it took up to 2 weeks before they were granted access after paying. Finally, the email they were expecting came in, and they were granted access after installing Skix. This was the new software/program that would allow them to access the Shadow Web servers. Little did they know what they were getting themselves into. I won't go into detail as to what they mentioned in their report, because it's still under investigation due to the person being murdered in their own home from an unknown. This is where I will mention my experience as part of my personal investigation. I was given a link to the Shadow Web by the recently deceased. With permission from the big head, I was able to sit down and proceed. I took the security precautions and I paid the fee. Oh my god. I apologize, that was my alarm. It took the Shadow Web admin 2 days to send the email allowing me access. In the email, they prompted me to join as many as 4 live sessions that were going throughout the week. One of them was called Shark Bait. Another was called Shit Cereal. The other 2 are too gross to mention. The Shadow Web entrance that I was given was a portal to about 10 other websites through the Shadow Web. The websites didn't have names. They were named by numbers in a 1 to 10 list. There were about 100 other websites on the bottom, but mainly were all under construction. On the main page, it showed the times and dates of the 4 shows they were going to be broadcasting live on the shadow web through a stream. There were archives that began in March of 2015 and ended in August of 2013. These archives were of previous live streams that had already happened. I decided to take a look. The one that I chose was called Salted Snail. I didn't really know what to expect before clicking it. Judging by the name, I thought there had to be a snail involved. There wasn't. I clicked the link and it took me to a brown page with an ad, and the video behind the ad. The ad started with a clown laughing. Then he says, "Not so fast! You have to go through me before you see what you came to see." He reminded me of the Captain Spaulding. He had severed heads in the background. His face was painted and smeared. His clothes spattered with bloodstains. In the ad, he encouraged viewers to come and join one of the next sessions coming up, and had to pay the fee to see the fun unfold. He mentioned that the viewers were in charge, and that they were in control of what happened to the sadistic victims. He then looked closely in the camera and said, "It's gonna be one hell of a show." The ad ends. The video is now available to play. The video is titled Salted Snail. The video begins. No credit. It just begins. You see the clown again, walking out from behind a white curtain that has what looked like shit or old blood smeared all over it, with a light behind it. His face is painted, and he's naked. He walks out of the curtain, chuckling to himself and smiling, scratching his ass and balls. He then walks towards the camera and shakes his penis in front of the camera and announces how happy he is to see the new members. He then goes on a 30-second rant about law enforcement and how they can't catch him, and how he's in the US and lives next door to a state trooper, and how will they catch him, thanking all of his friends in China. I'm guessing they're hackers who keep him anonymous? Anyways, after his rant, he then says the show is scheduled to stream for 15 minutes, so he has to stick to schedule because he's very, very hungry and hasn't eaten in the past 2 days. He then flashes his ribs at the camera. He wasn't that skinny. He then asks if everyone watching is ready for the show. A lot of people responding in the chat side box, yes. He reminds everyone that he is in control for this show, not the viewers. He then chuckles and says, "I'll be right back." He goes behind the curtain and then rolls out a black barrel and places it in front of the camera. He then walks around the barrel, knocking it around with his fist as if knocking on a door. He then kicks it hard with his heel. You can hear something in the barrel. He then grabs what seems like a flathead screwdriver and pries open the barrel. You can see a head full of hair as the lid opens. A girl is sitting there, alive. He then yells at her in Chinese to stand up. She can barely stand. Her body is so soggy from what I assume was water that she was in. He then looks at the camera and says, "Doesn't she look delicious? Delicious as a cake." The girl had her hands tied behind her back, and her mouth was bounded in multiple layers of cloth. She looked too weak to scream, too weak to escape, or even attempt. She just stood there, from what seems to be like if she was accepting her death. Then the clown went behind the curtain and came back out with a knife and razor. He then got in front of the camera and said, "I love me some Chinese food. It's dinner time." The girl then turned to him and looked at him, and he nodded at her and said, Yes, it's time." Her eyes opened wide. She tried to scream, but she couldn't. He then teased her, poking at her with a knife. She began to bleed instantly from the shoulder, as if cutting a piece of cake. Pretty soon, he was at the other shoulder, and then her chest, breast, and stomach, cutting little squares all over with the razor blade. The scene was extremely gorish and violent, almost as if filleting a fish. By the time he was finished with her body, he had a plate filled with her skin and tissues, what seemed like a plate full of soggy skin. The girl was still alive. Her body looked like it had been eaten by piranhas. The only thing remaining were her breasts, her face, and hair. He then took the plate behind the curtain and brought back out another plate. He then looks at the camera and says, "Well, look at that. Doesn't she look great? You can say she may have lost a couple of pounds, huh?" He then winks at the camera and laughs, and then proceeds to cut off the girl's ears and lips. What looks now like a mutilated body that is still alive left me wondering what he had done to other people in the past. I was enraged and extremely disturbed by what I had seen. The finale showed the clown coming out of the curtain with 2 containers of salt. He then poured the salt off over her body, where her skin had been cut off. He poured a good amount on her ears and lips too. The girl, suffering, hardly moving but still somewhat standing. He then takes another look at the camera and says, "I bet you motherfuckers thought I was gonna kill her, didn't you? I am not a murderer." He then pushes her head back down into the barrel and closes the lid, looks at the camera and says, "Stay tuned to the next episode." The camera then shows him putting a white tablecloth over the barrel and placing the plate full of soggy flesh on the barrel. He then lights a candle, grabs a fork and knife, and pulls up a chair. The camera shows him there eating flesh while chuckling away and talking to himself. The screen then floods with the words "till the next episode" over and over again, with some ridiculous circus music playing in the background. The camera then dims as it shows him there eating and laughing away. The then black screen shows the words "offline." I immediately became concerned for the girl. She was Asian. The clown clearly looked American, or sounded American at least. He really resembled Captain Spaulding from The Devil's Rejects or House of a Thousand Corpses. I'm assuming that's what he was trying to be or act like. I contacted my chief and had a personal meeting with him and explained everything about what I had seen. He then laughed and said, "Ah, you've seen him, huh? That evil fucking clown on the internet. He's been around since the late 90s doing these shows. He seems to buy women off the market and tortures the shit out of them." He then shrugs his shoulders and says, "We don't know who he is or where he's located. The Chinese help keep him anonymous." To me, this was something new. As an agent who dealt with homicides and piracy, I'd never encountered or seen anything like this. I'm now retired, and thought it was important for me to share this story. Everyone should know the deep web is deep and free, but the shadow web, that is something you don't want to go to. Hey, my name's Ryan. Not my real name, but the name I'll be using for myself herein. For obvious reasons, I won't be using anyone's real names. That's if I even know their real names anyways. I'm still not sure. I'm a 23-year-old guy from the UK, and I used to work on the deep web. Now, before you go grab your pitchforks and torches, the deep web isn't all you think it is. It's not guns, drugs, and porn. No, in fact, it's mostly news leaks, software sharing, forums, money solutions. It's a lot of things, but very few of them are what modern media would have you believe. And with such a plethora of services, it's only natural that there are many job opportunities on the deep web. I worked there for a good few years until I called it quits. If you're wondering why I stopped, well, that's a story for another day. For now, I'll get started where it makes the most sense. The beginning. I was a college student, part-time. Between my mind-numbing engineering course, I worked at everyone's favorite fast food outlet, McDonald's. This kept my life quite busy in my downtime, and in my free time, I'd browse the deep web. There were a few forums I would frequent, all of them being based around world events that the media would refuse to cover. This sort of stuff interested me. Getting to see a world that mainstream media didn't want you to see. It was real, you know? Well, I slowly ingrained myself into the community for one such forum. I knew quite a few people that posted there regularly. Some of them were PIs, some of them investigative journalists. Some were more colorful characters. But the main theme across them all was that they all tended to find things that they shouldn't, and also wanted to share these things. Hence, they used this forum to spread these taboo findings. Now, I'll go into more depth about the others later, maybe in another post, but today, I'll be focusing on Matt. At least, I'll be calling him Matt. Matt was one of those revolutionist types who was constantly trying to prove conspiracies about governments, corporations. You know the type I'm talking about. Nut jobs. But the thing that made Matt different was that he had proof for his theories. He had evidence. Sources. And my story today is how I ended up becoming one such source. It was an average Sunday. I don't work Sundays, so it was my off day. I spent it procrastinating away on both the ClearNet and deep web alike. I was checking out the forum I spoke about above and saw I had a DM from Matt. I trusted Matt. He told me about himself, and that checked out. He was a real honest dude. So when he asked me stuff, I tended to be just as honest, which meant he knew what town I lived in, and apparently, there was something going on in my town. Now, I live in a developing town, so quite a lot is always going on, but this news, this is not your normal developing town stuff. Apparently, the local council were blackmailing one of the landowners to force them to sell their land for development. The landowner in question was a farmer who owned a sizable piece at the edge of the urban sprawl. After reading this, I responded to Matt with the usual, "That's cool, thanks for the info." But he replied with, "But there's more to this. Now, I don't know what they're using as blackmail, but it has to be big. That farmer makes way too much money off his land to sell at the price they're demanding." Intrigued, I asked Matt if there was any way he could find out more. That's when he asked, "Yes, if you're willing to help." Now, I had never actively discovered any of his hidden news stuff. I'd only browsed it. That's what made me and Matt such good friends. But him asking me to get involved, It had me at a crossroads. I left my deep web browser without replying. Rude, I know, but I didn't quite know how to reply. I tried to focus on the latest game theory video, but I couldn't get the thought out of my head. Could I reveal some hidden news? Some conspiracy? I logged back into the forum, muting MatPat's dulcet theorist tones, and replied to Matt. What are you asking me to do? I waited with bated breath for the response. Just talk to the guy. Maybe some pictures, nothing crazy. These people tend to be more than happy to tell someone about this crap. I looked at the response and pondered. What's the danger? Anything I should know? No danger. Usually for a farmer, he doesn't have a gun license, so you should be fine. Just talk to him. I should mention by this point that Matt had told me the farmer's name and address, but I'm opting to leave that information out for all of our safety. As I was considering taking Matt on his offer, he sent me another message. I'll pay. What's your PayPal? I froze. I had no idea Matt paid his sources. I slowly typed out one of my many PayPal emails. You have to have lots to order money on the deep web. 250 euros now, 250 after you give me the juice. I almost fainted after reading that sentence. 500 euros for driving to a farmer's house and talking to him? That was almost too good to be true. I responded with a sharp fuck yeah, and I waited, refreshing the email associated with that PayPal account. Bam. Dear Ryan, I forgot to give myself a fake last name, so I'll just leave that bit empty. You have received 250 euros from 3E99QR6@hotmail.com. I checked the PayPal account, and sure enough, 250 euros sitting there. Sent. You better not run away with this money now. I forgot I was talking to Matt. No, of course. I'll head down tomorrow evening and talk to him. Want me to record it or anything? Heart beating, I awaited his reply. No, I'll trust your word. If I have any doubts, I'll send another source up to confirm it. He had another source in my town? Why choose me? I decided to save those questions and be thankful for this very well-paid opportunity. I finished the conversation off with a, "Talk tomorrow, Matt," and I went to bed. Not to sleep. There was no way I was sleeping with this crap racing through my head. After college the next day, I drove out to the farm. You could see the construction firm setting up in the fields closest to the suburbia. I pulled down a dirt road and up to the drive of the farmhouse, and I felt every bump on the way down. My car was not made for off-roading by any measure. I locked my car and knocked on the front door. No reply. My heart was thudding against my ribs, and my mind racing in anticipation. I knocked again, opting to call out. Hello? Are you there? I'm here to talk to you about your land agreement. I heard shuffling behind the door, followed by the sound of the lock turning. Chain still on, I saw his face. He had the stereotypical look of an old English farmer, flat cap and all. What'd you want to be discussing? He asked in a deep, angst-filled tone. I'm here to talk about the... I carefully chose my next words as to let him know I was on his side. Circumstances of your agreement and their bias against you. I'd like to know more about the situation. Perhaps I can help you? My confidence wavered near the end of my speech. He didn't look strong, but his gaze was more than terrifying. His look softened, and he opened the door, gesturing that I enter. I was wondering when some journalists might take an interest. Well, I can tell you, it's open shut. Nothing more to it than the obvious. I sat myself down in his rustic living room. I'm pretty sure the furniture was older than him, and that's saying something. I'm no journalist, sir, or at least I don't think I am. Not the conventional sort, anyways. Despite my racked nerves, I managed to keep a face of confidence. His interest seems to pique at my words. Ah, tea? He asked, his glum look seeming to fade. Perhaps it was meant for unwanted guests, and my words swayed him in my favor. Yes, please. Milk, no sugar. I'll hold off on questioning until we're both comfortable. As he busied himself with the tea, I sat there wondering, what the fuck was I doing? He placed the cup before me. The delicate china seemed ready to break without notice. I decided that maybe I wasn't thirsty. The cup looked pretty expensive. So, what are you interested in, my boy? I looked over at the antique coffee table, meeting his gaze. I've heard that your situation has come about because of some information being used against you. His face looked like that of a scalded child, that of shock and fear. Yes, that be true. How'd you come about that information? I faltered, wondering how I should reply. A friend of mine has taken interest in your case. He wishes to know more so that he can help your situation. The old farmer looked down into his tea for a second. If I say anything, it never goes to the cops, all right? My heart seemed to stop for a moment. What could this old man have done that warranted such caution and suspicion that the police didn't know? My expression must have betrayed my thoughts, because after shooting me a glance, he sighed and began explaining. My wife was a lovely lady. Never hurt a fly, she wouldn't. But a couple of months ago, some drunk kids, they came from the city, you see. They broke into the farmhouse. We both shot up and looked at one another, and she shook her head as if to tell me to stay quiet. She opened the gun safe beneath our bed and got out her shotgun. I interrupted. But I'm told you don't have a gun license. His face reddened slightly. No, not me, my lad, but my wife does. She does most of the work these days. Well, she got it out and opened the door. I don't know what happened, but I heard shots, and the old man started crying. I was at a loss. What can you say to that? So kids broke in, so his wife shot them? Sir, what happened after? He wiped his eyes and looked back at me with a sniffle. We hid them. Buried them. Cops traced it here, and next thing we know, we got some council suits telling us to sell or we'd go down for murder. He sighed heavily and sat, his head in his hands, awaiting a response. But why not go public? They invaded your property. I'm sure it's self-defense. He met his eyes with a piercing look. Those boys were the mayor's sons. If I go public, I'll go down. And if I don't sell... My heart was practically in my throat as he stumbled over his words. Choking back tears, I stood up. Thank you for your time. I'll see what I can do. He stood with me, his face painted with a pained smile. I'll see you out, lad. As he walked to the door, I saw his wife standing in the entranceway, shotgun over her arm. She was not as old as the man, but by no means young. She moved aside, glaring at me coldly. The second the door was open, I practically ran to my car, fumbling to get the keys into the ignition and get home. I sat at my laptop, still trembling from my previous encounter. I was typing up my report to Matt, still practically shitting myself. I'm sure that if I had said the wrong thing, I would have died in that farmhouse. He replied to my message quickly, considering its length. That's some story, Ryan. People will love it. I'll see what I can do for the poor couple. And for you, dangers considered, I've dropped you the rest of the money and a little extra. I'm sorry, I had no idea the wife had a gun. I checked my PayPal. 600 euros had been added to my account. There was no way this was all real. This had to be a joke, right? But the agreed amount was 250, right? I typed out rapidly. Turns out this story is better than I expected. I'll be in touch, Ryan. I left our message at that for the day. I just earned 850 euros for talking to a man in the middle of a field about murder. What the fuck? Well, that's the first job I ever had on the deep web, and what started this whole fucking mess. I'd explain more, and I need some sleep. Let's just say that isn't the last I heard from Matt, and certainly not the last job I took on the deep web. I'll be focusing on Matt and his jobs for now. They're most of what I have to tell. But maybe I'll talk about the other jobs I took from other people along the way. For now, night, guys. Time for another night of no sleep. Part 2. Hey guys, Ryan again. You seem to like my last post quite a lot. If you haven't seen it yet, here's the link. It garnered a lot of attention, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. Some of my old links on the deep web found the post, and, well, I just hope I don't get roped back into this crap. It's hard enough to leave in the first place. Another thing as well, I call it the deep web, as do most people I talk to. I know people call it the dark net or the dark web, but I call it the deep web. Sorry if that gets you tilted. It's not the proper term, but it's the one most people know, so... And yes, I am from the UK. This all took place in the UK. People can own guns here, it's just not common. They're generally used by farmers. One more thing before I carry on my story. I'm not sure how Matt knew my location. He guessed and I confirmed it. Still not sure how he guessed it. Wish I could ask him, but it's a bit late for that. Anyways, back to the story. A couple of weeks had passed since my job for Matt. I had spent those weeks impulse buying everything I could on Amazon thanks to Matt's generous pay, which meant a new laptop among other things. I tried to keep my spending quiet so people didn't start asking questions, but it's pretty hard to hide a brand new laptop. College had broken up for half term, so I had a week off. Got paid holiday from work and everything. As usual, I was wasting hours away on the internet. I had taken up a new internet hobby, and I was intrigued by that elderly couple Matt had sent and talked me to. I couldn't find much on them on the clear net, but I did find something interesting on the deep web. Turns out the old lady, I'll call her Janice, well, she had a criminal record for ABH, battery, and assault. This record wasn't from her teen years. This record was from a mere 12 years ago. She'd managed to get off with a fine in community service somehow. Guess because they couldn't put an OAP behind bars. I wanted to do more digging, but then the thought came to me. I know a professional at this stuff, right? I sent a message to Matt asking if he knew anything or had done more research. I didn't get an immediate reply, which is unusual for him. When he did respond, all he said was, "Yes, we need to talk, but not now." I was naturally spooked by this. What had Matt found out? Assault charges weren't that interesting, right? The events of my last post still mess with me. That woman had killed 2 kids, and she was standing right goddamn there. There's no way I was going near that place again. I felt bad for the old guy, but sooner they were gone, the better. Matt got back to me a couple hours later. There's more to the story. I've been taking a look into news stories for your town. The mayor's kids aren't the only missing children in recent years. My mind raced. The immediate conclusion I drew was that the old woman was a serial killer or something. She seemed capable of that shit. All the missing persons tend to be teenagers with parents in positions of power in the town. He sent this message with a link to the ClearNet file sharing site. It had pictures of the missing persons' police reports. How the fuck Matt got these, I'll never know, but I could see a trend right away. The mayor's sons, a local entrepreneur's daughter, then a police inspector's son. They all certainly followed a theme. So what does it all mean? Because there's no way I'm going back to that fucking house. Especially now I know this. I tapped out a response with a deep set of fear and dread inside of me. Yet that feeling didn't stop the slight excitement at this revelation. Was I actually considering taking another job from Matt? I'll have my other source meet with you. Choose a location and time. I know you have all week off. Now, before you draw conclusions, he didn't hack my computer to find that out or anything. I told him. Like I say, we're good friends. I met up with Matt's other source, Jacob. Again, not his real name, but you get the idea at this point. We met at a coffee shop in town. I brought a friend along. You can never be too careful. Jacob was a professional photographer who worked full-time for Matt. I had no idea what that entailed, but I think I'd rather not know. Once I knew he was legit, I told my friend he could go, much to my friend's relief. Jacob was a bedraggled-looking man in his 30s. The best way I can describe him is that if you saw him, you'd think he just walked off the street. He even smelt like it. We work together now. He spoke with an accent akin to that of Eastern European. I've never been good with accents, so I have no idea where it's specifically from. Despite what you think, his English was very good. You have a car? He asked, his expression unwavering. Yeah, it's parked out front. My jalopy was, indeed, outside the coffee shop. Quite why he was interested in it, though, I had no idea. We take it to the farm. Watch the lady. Understand? I nodded slowly. Not sure that I was quite at liberty to decline. Good. We go now. I hate coffee. Makes me shit. I can't argue with that. The drive out of town had me pretty shaken. I was going to back out there, and I wasn't even sure how much I'd be making for it. In my haste, I'd neglected to ask Matt for a paycheck. The construction at the end of the couple's farm had extended slightly. I could see the foundations being set by a swarm of reflective workmen. Once past the chaos of the developing town, I slowed down. I drove past the road leading up to the farmhouse. Instead of taking another, even more overgrown and neglected road further down, which led to an abandoned barn on the couple's property, I parked just outside of sight of the barn, and Jacob busied himself with a duffel bag he brought along. He got out a few different, very expensive-looking cameras, and then began setting them to look out the car's back left window. Aiming them at the barns and fields behind, there was a line of shrubbery enclosing the barn was in, which left quite an ominous, claustrophobic feeling. Jacob didn't seem to feel this at all, but then again, he was a professional. I don't know what half the shit he had in there was, but by the time he was done, the setup looked pretty impressive. We put sensors in the field, so know where the old lady's walking. You lock car. Someone steal my camera, I kill you. He gave me a look that only seemed half joking. I laughed nervously in response. We walked around the farm, carrying small GoPro-like cameras with antennas attached to them. Every now and then, we would stop and attach one of the cameras somewhere, usually pointed towards barns or sheds. That kind of stuff. After about an hour of this, the skies were dark. Dusk had been setting in when we arrived at night, and night had rapidly approached. I could see the lights of the farmhouse in the distance. "We need sensors there. You smaller, you put there." I looked at Jacob with an expression akin to that of terror. His look made it obvious his statement was not up for debate. I took a sensor from him and crept towards the shrubbery surrounding the farmhouse. My heart was thumping hard against my chest as I crouched in the mud, staring at the farmhouse. I placed one of the sensors in a bush, pointing towards the front door. The farmhouse was by no means big, so my crawl towards the rear side didn't take long. And I saw a silhouette in one of the downstairs windows, and I froze. Fuck me, I practically shit myself then and there. Unlike Jacob, I didn't need a coffee to shit myself, just a psycho old lady with a shotgun. The back door had a canopy enclosing it. A sensor might be able to pick up movement from the shrubbery, but there was no guarantee. I had to get closer. I slowly and painfully dragged myself over the bushes surrounding the farmhouse, wrecking my new jeans in the process. I creeped towards the back of the house, spotting a small garage around the back, rolling door half open. I approached with caution, fitting that of a soldier in enemy territory. Although that analogy That analogy wasn't far from the truth. The garage was filled with years of clutter. I placed the sensor inside, pointed to the back door of the farmhouse. I was just about to head back when I heard the back door open. My heart dropped. In a panic, I climbed on top of a knocked-over wardrobe and seated myself inside it, hopefully out of view. The garage stank of refuse, but that wasn't my main concern. The old lady walked out into the backyard carrying a bin bag. I let out a sigh of relief as she threw the bag into the large dumpster, turned, and returned into the farmhouse. Despite knowing she was gone, I waited a good while before exiting the garage and returning to the shrub line. Once again, pulling myself over and returning to Jacob. "What takes so long? Is only sensor, not rocket science," Jacob said through a smirk. I'm sure he was joking, but my nerves weren't in a humorous state. The walk back to the car was silent. Once back, Jacob took out a laptop and began tapping away. Every now and then I would hear a beeping sound coming from the laptop speakers, which would jolt me back from my drowsiness. "All sensors work. Now we wait. You sleep first. I wake you if I need you," Jacob said, breaking the silence. I grunted in a way of response. I was already halfway asleep, and I wasn't awaiting his permission to be fully asleep. I don't know how long I was out until he woke me. "The lady is moving. Wake up, dumb shit," came his deep voice, pulling me unceremoniously out of my slumber. What? My mind still not fully awake. He kicked the back of my chair from the back seat. "The lady, she's coming this way." This woke me up quite a bit more. I looked behind me at Jacob, his laptop screen illuminating his face. "Where is she now?" He closed his laptop lid and pointed out the window to his left. She had just broken through the tree line and was walking towards the abandoned barn. I sat down in my seat, praying she wouldn't look over and see the car. I wish I'd bought one in a less conspicuous color. Red doesn't tend to blend well with shrubbery. She vanished from view into the barn. Jacob looked over at me. Unusually, he seemed just as tense as me. He whispered, "Get out. Stay low." I go first. I leave the key in the ignition. If she sees, we run. Out of everything he said, I could only agree with one statement. We run. That idea seemed more appetizing to me at that point. We both got out carefully as to not make noise when opening or closing the car doors. Jacob led, sticking to the shadows with a purposeful step akin to that of a ninja. This clearly wasn't his first rodeo. Once we reached the wall of the barn, he approached a low window and peeked his camera over, bringing it back down and looking at the viewfinder. "Clear, we go inside," he whispered, his voice barely audible despite the silence of the night. I followed him as he entered the doorway, which seemed long absent of a door. The barn, surely enough, was empty, yet a light was being emitted from one of the far corners, seeming to come from the floorboards themselves. As we approached, we saw a hatch on the door, thrown open, steps descending below. Jacob signed for me to move behind a rusting tractor and follow suit behind me. He picked up a loose stone from the floor and threw it at the far wall, making a loud thudding noise. I stared him dead in the eyes, panic written across my face. He simply stared at me with a calm expression, put a finger over his lips. The light went out immediately, and I heard the old lady ascending the stairs. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her look around the barn before she walked back to the hatch. I heard the sound of the hatch being slammed, followed by another metallic noise, and her hurried footsteps evacuating the barn. Me and Jacob sat in the quiet for a good half hour before daring to move from our hiding spot. Jacob took out his phone to look at some app he had set up with the sensors. "She's gone," he confirmed, much to both of our reliefs. We felt ready to collapse then and there. Either that, or ready to run to the car and drive as far from here as possible. We both stood and made our way over to the hatch, stepping across the decrepit barn cautiously. There was a padlock on the hatch, a shiny new one, contrasting against the dead wood of the floor. "Hold." Jacob grunted, passing me his camera. He busied himself with the lock for a couple of minutes. I couldn't see what he was doing, but I heard a metallic crick, and he began to slowly open the hatch. He took out a flashlight and turned it on, pointing the beam into the darkness below. At that moment, I felt the kind of indescribable animal dread that you'd feel if you were staring down a pack of hungry wolves. I did not want to be the first to go down those stairs, and I was sure whatever was down there, it was evil. Jacob seemed unfazed, already beginning his descent. He looked back at me. I'm sure I looked quite pathetic, stood there. "Come, trust me." Sure, I'll trust a man who I've only just met as we walk into some creepy asshole in an abandoned barn belonging to a murderous old lady. Fuck it. If I was gonna die, it might as well be for money. I descended into the ominous darkness, following Jacob closely. We reached the bottom of the stairs and entered a small room with a workbench, a corkboard full of papers, and a door in one corner. The smell hit me like almost nothing ever had before. It was the smell of rot. If death had a smell, I'm sure this would be it. Jacob set to work photographing almost everything. Handing me a flashlight, he said, "Here, you look at board. See if anything worth picture." I went over to the board and began sifting through the papers pinned to it. There were news reports about the missing children, pictures of a few of them, and reports on the town's expansion and the surrounding farmland. Amongst these were handwritten notes and fancy cursive, detailing things such as drinks at X pub or lives in Y farmland. Amongst these were handwritten notes and fancy cursive. This gave me chills that were truly indescribable. This old lady had been stalking those kids, working out when best to strike. God, Jacob put his hand on my shoulder. I had a miniature fit as I turned to see him, backing away, with a smile on his face. I just mess with you. I am done here. We go now. I wasn't going to argue with that. We made our way back to the car, and Jacob reviewed the footage on his laptop. What was behind that door? I asked. Curiosity twinged in my voice. Best you not know. You do good. Now let's go. I come back for sensors tomorrow. Yet another great idea. It seemed the less I know, the better in this case. I began to drive back into town, passing that goddamn farmhouse on the way. I dropped Jacob off at some suburb and began to drive back to my flat. I was so goddamn tired. Before Jacob left again, he gave me a piece of paper with an email saying, "You good kid. Message with their email. I tell you if I need help again." I still wasn't quite sure what I did to help, but clearly I did well, as he also passed me a bulky envelope. I opened it, and I saw it was full of 20-pound bills. Once I was home, I counted them. 1,000 pounds. Fuck me. I was beginning to think this wouldn't be a bad career. Ask no questions, do my job, get my paycheck. Jacob sure had the right fucking idea working for Matt. I still couldn't help but be curious about what was behind that door. Not like I was gonna find out myself. Quite the contrary, I think. I think I had my fill of that fucking farm. But I never did find out where that smell was coming from. That's all I have to tell for now. It takes me hours to write this stuff out, and I'm quite busy these days. Especially with old contacts of mine cropping up again, asking these questions. Maybe making all this stuff public isn't such a good idea after all. At least not my work with Matt. Well, I'll see. Maybe I'll make part 3, maybe not. Either way, I've got a few busy days ahead, so don't expect anything major soon. For now, I'm gonna go to bed and try and forget the past. I doubt I will, though. I'm in for another night of no sleep. How's it going, guys? Before we go on to parts 3 and 4, I'd just like to remind you that I do have my own subreddit up and running. For those of you who want to post scary stories, art, music, or any horror-related content that you'd like to be seen by this channel, please go ahead and post it to the subreddit. Also, I've got my own Patreon. It is patreon.com/sleepless_nights. So far, I've only got 2 tiers running at the moment, and if you feel comfortable enough, or if you want to support me, go ahead and head on over there, and you can donate as much or as little as you feel comfortable. And even if you're not feeling comfortable donating, just you being here and listening to the channel, coming by and hearing my stories, it's enough for me. So, I'd like to say thank you. I appreciate y'all being here. And with that, we're going to move on to the next story. I also would like to apologize for my stumbling over words and mispronouncing things. Some of these stories are not the most eloquently written, and it also doesn't help that I am extremely tired from studying for finals and am slipping in and out of consciousness. Not actually, falling asleep, but focus is difficult. But I'm gonna take a 5-minute break. Actually, I'm just gonna grab myself some water here. I was gonna go grab myself some caffeine, but I don't need it. let's go ahead and move on to the next story. This is part 3. Hey everyone, it's Ryan again. I mentioned in my last post, link here if you missed it, that things were getting a bit hairy. Well, I'm out of town and sorting things out. I've received multiple threats for talking about this stuff, but I think my tracks are well enough covered. I should be safe. I can't help shaking the feeling I'm being watched, though. I'll put it down to paranoia, but enough about that. I'll be fine. It's time I carried on with my story. After the second set of events at the farmhouse, I made the outward decision to never go there again, regardless of pay. Yes, I liked the grand I had to spend, and yes, I was curious. But I wanted to live, and going back there would lower my life expectancy by 60-odd years. If the old lady didn't shoot me, I'd likely die from cardiac arrest just from being back there. Matt has been busy researching the case. I've messaged him a few times, but I only get one-word replies. I can't help but worry about him. This whole thing feels off, and not just because of the murderous old lady. I decided I'd do some of my own digging, and perhaps I could find something to help Matt out. In all honesty, not knowing was killing me. But then again, well, knowing could literally kill me. Regardless, I started by looking at the cases of the missing children. Online records showed that the mayor's 2 kids went missing a couple months ago. Considering the old lady supposedly shot them only a couple weeks ago, either that old man was lying or those kids went missing before showing up at the farmhouse. The other kids had all went missing within 2 months of each other. All the same story. They go out to visit a friend or go to an event and never show up. No trace of the disappearance. No leads. No witnesses. They were all dead cases. All kids of powerful couples. Going missing, and then 2 turn up at the farmhouse on the fringe of town, get shot, and all of a sudden the person who shot them is being blackmailed by those same powerful people. Perhaps the old lady wasn't at fault at all, but what could be going on? It's been roughly 2 months since the last disappearance. Would there be another missing kid soon? If so, who? How was Matt so good at this stuff? And more to the point, how can he afford to pay people? Did he have a boss? This whole line of thought added to my theme of having lots of questions and barely any answers. But then again, some questions you just don't want answering. If the old lady didn't commit those murders, then why did she have that corkboard? Perhaps she was trying to find the truth as well. It hit me. Jacob. I sent Jacob an email asking if he had the photos of the corkboard, also letting him know to contact me on the sending email if he had any work for me. His reply came quite promptly. Ryan, I do have photos, but I can't show you. Photos are for Matt. You ask him, not me. Thanks for letting me know email. I'll let you know if I have work. You good kid. I sighed in defeat. I could ask Matt, but there's no way he'd say yes. I didn't want to go behind his back, and Jacob was his employee, but... Jacob, I'm looking into the same case as Matt. Please, I really need those photos. I'll pay you. Ironic. I was going to offer Jacob the same money he'd paid me not long ago. Ryan, I have uploaded the photos. Here is the link. Link goes in 5 minutes. Get quick. You owe me job. I always found it hard to argue with Jacob, especially when his point involves me not losing my money. I quickly visited the link and downloaded the photos. It was a ClearNet link, so it was about 90% sure the files were safe. I studied the photos, trying to scavenge what information I could. I've been looking through the photos for a few hours. I wasn't much further, but I did find out all the kids were involved in drugs. Nothing hardcore, just weed and a couple less intense pills. I suppose when you have rich parents, you can afford to do that crap. Quite how the old lady knew this was beyond me. But then again, everything about that hag was completely beyond me. The two kids who invaded the farmhouse were dealers, it turns out. Weed dealers. They operated in the town. Where they got their drugs from was a mystery, though. The other kids all seemed to be users. The kids in question would also often frequent the same pubs, restaurants, shops. Seems they were all friends. Even with this new information, I was still no closer to actually having an idea of what the fuck was going on. A bunch of druggy friends all vanished progressively, then two break into the home of an old lady who was watching them? This was all incredibly confusing, and I still was no closer to knowing anything substantial. I decided I'd look into drug traffic in my town. Best way I knew how? You guessed it, deep web. I went back onto my favorite forum and started asking around, pretending to be asking as a buyer. I found a guy who was a local dealer and asked to meet up under the premise of buying some weed. I had no fucking idea how much weed costs or how much to buy, so I asked for 2 spliffs worth. Do kids even say spliff anymore? After a short drive to the town center, I met with a guy at some apartment block. He was waiting in the foyer. I had brought 500 pounds of the 1K Jacob had paid me. I wasn't here for the drugs, of course. I was here for the answers. I greeted the guy with a handshake. As part of our agreement, I'm not allowed to describe him, so he was a person. He had arms and legs. That's all I have to say. After talking to him for a while, offering the money and saying a dealer had hurt a friend of mine, and I wanted to know who, he told me a bit about the local dealers. Apparently, the entrepreneur, whose kid went missing, had been siphoning off business funds to run a deep web drug trade in the town. The dealer didn't know much more than that. Only the boss himself, and the fact that the trade was carried out over the deep web. Guy even said the deep web gave him the chills. He just operated on it because that's how the boss likes it. He also said he knew 2 dealers that had been taken out recently. He wasn't sure who did it, just that they were missing. I thanked him and I headed home. Was this what being Matt was like? It was pretty exciting. Our whole situation was still irredeemably fucked, but actually finding stuff out? That almost made this worth it. Oh, and I never actually bought the weed, by the way. In fact, he ended up smoking it, so... He said snitching gets him edged, but clearly 500 pounds is enough to buy some pretty useful info. So a bunch of druggy kids who are all friends go missing when they go to meet their friends, whose dealer works for a guy on the deep web, whose kid is also friends with those kids, and those dealers invade the home of someone investigating them and end up getting killed, and all the other kids are still missing. All this had me at was that clearly, that businessman was corrupt as fuck. If only I knew someone on the Lara. Breaking from the story to let you know, if you haven't read my courier story, you won't know who Lara is. Give it a read if you missed it. Link is right here, and we will read that immediately after this. I sent her a message asking if she had done any work in the area, if she had any contacts, and she got back to me after a couple of hours. The hours I spent staring up at the ceiling, contemplating why I took that job in the first place. Hey stranger, long time no talk. Yeah, I've ran a few jobs. What's up? Something wrong? I was at a standstill for what to reply with. Should I tell her the truth? Some dealer attacked a friend of mine. All I want to do is find out who they are. I paused, choosing my next few words with inhuman trepidation. But they went missing a few weeks ago. Know anything? I waited, my breath catching in my throat as the seconds ticked by. Ah, I think I know the guy. I take drops from him often. Mostly weed, right? Last time I saw him, he was gassing on about how someone who was watching their work. There were a few kids with him at that place. All looked about his age. Half of them spent their time ogling me as ever. Stupid kids. I thanked her for her help and promised I'd talk to her more often again. I'd been pretty busy recently, after all. I think I was beginning to get what was going on. A bunch of kids get together, all with powerful parents who can aid them, and run a deep web drug business? With the mayor, police inspector, and supporting entrepreneur, and the kids themselves, they could run a pretty good business free of risk. And anyone who tried to interfere, well, just look at the old couple. I thought about what Matt might know. Maybe he could help. I composed a message full of the information I'd gathered and the sources. It took me about an hour to write this up. His reply came more promptly than his previous ones. Holy crap, Ryan. You've been doing my job for me, eh? I was trying to figure out the same things, but being so far away, I couldn't meet with any contacts. I was actually considering asking you to work for me again, but hey, I needn't ask. Good job, man. I'll get to work trying to find out more. In the meantime, I need you to lay low. I've looked higher up the chain than you, and let's just say some potentially dangerous people are behind this. Same account as last time for your pay, I take it. I was at a loss. I had found more than Matt? These people were dangerous? I mean, I know they attacked the old lady, but where did it go from here? I was so busy thinking this over, I forgot Matt had just offered to pay me. I replied with a curt yes and good luck, and sure enough, there in my account was another 900 pounds. Christ, I mean, cost considered, it was more like 400 pounds, but still, that was good money. And yet, was I really about to risk it by going against Matt and investigating more? Well, that's it for now. Before I can put out the next part, I need to make sure some people are okay being mentioned in it. After all, this information is pretty, well, illegal. But I should be able to get the go-ahead by tomorrow. After all, money talks. And I didn't impulsively spend all the money that Matt paid me, which leaves me with some bribery cash. Things will nearly be wrapped up in the next part. Sorry for extending things out, but there are a lot of factors at play, and I control barely any of them. Hopefully, I'll see you all for part 4. Until then, I'm gonna go and head to bed for another painful night of no sleep. Alright. Guess who's back at it again? It's me, Ryan. I mentioned last time that this part should tie most things up, and it should. It did. But things have been happening recently that make me question whether I even found the truth. You guys also seem pretty concerned for my safety, and I can assure you I'm safe where I am now. I post these on public Wi-Fi outside of the house using a VPN. My location should be pretty untraceable. I really do appreciate the concern. Good to know you guys are looking out for me. Time to carry on the story. I was stuck in an impasse. The situation had me hook, line, and sinker, and despite the inherent creepiness behind it, I wanted to know more about this unraveling story. Matt told me to lay low, and I assumed that meant avoiding the deep web as well. I stayed offline for a while, resigning myself to the confines of normal life. I tried to get on with my college work and part-time job like nothing was wrong, but something was very, very wrong. My uneasiness had been rising since I visited that dealer. Not only had I paid for information, I paid for his silence. That old lady was clearly attacked. I didn't want to take that chance. I decided it might be time to unwind until I get out of town for a while. I contacted some relatives and offered to bring my grandma to see them, me in tow, for a week. The family rather rarely got together these days, and we were running out of chances to all be together. I drove down to the elderly home on the fringe of town, picking up my gran. She smelled like her same old perfume, and it was nice to see her again. Almost made me forget my situation. As I drove out of town, I passed the building works. I could see the frames and scaffolding for the sprawling 2B residential suburb. And as I drove further down, I passed that fucking farmhouse. It was nice to be out of town. For obvious reasons, I can't talk much about it. The last thing I need is my family getting dragged into it. My grandma stayed with my family, and I began the drive home, late at night as to miss the traffic. I'd gotten the time off work and college under the premise of a family emergency, yet as I drove closer to town, I saw another kind of emergency. The road past the farmhouse was blocked, blue flashing lights filling the scene. I brought my car to a halt and an officer approached. "Road's closed, kid. If you want to get into town, turn back and take the next 2 rights." I looked at him, my eyes betraying my shock. "What's wrong, son?" said the officer in a calm, inquisitive tone. "Nothing, sir. I used to visit the man who lived here. Is he okay?" The officer's face seemed to drop, his expression changing to sympathy. I sat in the local precinct. I'll call the policeman who was talking to me Sergeant Church. He asked me if I knew anything about the couple, if I had any idea what might have happened. See, they were killed. Gas explosion, supposedly. Thing was, I wasn't buying it. And from the sounds of things, neither was Church. I couldn't say much for obvious reasons. I made out that my gran knew the old guy and I used to check on him for her. He bought the story pretty easily, just a do-gooder kid checking up on an elderly couple. Then he started asking about the explosion, asked if I'd ever smelt anything off in the house, if I'd had any suspicions on what could have caused the leak. I said they were careful people and the man was a good handyman who could maintain most things in the house. All lies, of course, but the real lie was that their death was an accident. Just like the entire case was not open shut. "Thanks for the help, kid. I know this must be hard for you." He wrote a phone number in his notebook and tore free the page, handing it to me. "You ever need help or remember anything, give me a call." I thanked him and I headed on my way. Sitting back at my laptop, I decided I should check up on Matt, but he had beaten me to it. I had almost 20 missed emails from him. He knew everything. Apparently, Jacob had been casing the place again when it all happened. He thought they would be coming for me or Jacob next, but Jacob is a professional and I was out of town. We should both be relatively safe for now. But there was some good news. Jacob had followed the attacker back into town using a tracking device on his car. They had parked up at a warehouse in the industrial area of town. Seems cliche, eh? "Ryan, I know you've already put yourself at risk enough for this case, but I can't send Jacob. All I need you to do is get in there and identify anyone in there. You get a positive ID against any of the missing kids or their parents, we can blow this whole thing wide open." Fuck this. I was in way too deep. "You'd better pay me pretty fucking well for this. Those fucks are murderers." I responded, my mind in a confused state, torn between anger and fear. $5K. If you get in there and get a positive ID. Take pictures with whatever you have. I sat there, staring at the screen, contemplating. The drive to the warehouse was filled with anticipation of the unknown and the inherent danger lying within it. I hated this. I hated that I was doing this. I hated that I was actually slightly excited. I parked my car a few warehouses down and I began the walk over. masking myself in the shadows cast by the moon. If I was caught, I didn't want to think about it. I was standing before the warehouse. This was what all the research had culminated to. There was no way I could just waltz in there. I walked around to the back. A few containers were stacked next to a ladder scaling the entire building. I tested it. The last thing I wanted to do was make a load of noise with a creaky as fuck ladder. Sure that it wouldn't give me away, I climbed, my heart pounding strongly in my chest, almost bursting out. I reached the roof, lying down, edging myself over in a prone position. I reached the skylight, and it was covered in some kind of foil. The fuck? I saw the internal roof access in the corner of the roof opposite to me. I carefully crawled my way over, taking every caution not to make a single sound. I heard movement and talking outside the warehouse below me. I peeked over the edge of the roof and saw two darkly dressed men conversing. I was sure one of them was holding a handgun. This was so fucked. I took out my phone, making sure the flash was off. I snapped a picture. In the bad lighting, you could only just make out the people, the gun merely looking like a vague shadow. This was so fucked. I crouched at the door that would lead me into the warehouse. It was a fire escape. I could see the alarm mechanism fitted in the corner of the door. Luckily, being a student electrical engineer, I knew how to disable it. I carefully disarmed it by removing the power source and opened the door. It opened very slowly and silently. I stood at the top of the stairwell, panic setting in. I crouched low and looked over the edge of the floor, peering down the stairwell and into the warehouse. I saw bright lights and the same foil from the skylight. I edged my way down the stairs, keeping my body spread against them. I saw what may have been one of the biggest weed farms in the UK. Plants covered the warehouse floor, light illuminating and heating them. Despite the cold breeze entering through the open fire exit door, I was sweating, though not entirely because of the heat. I took out my phone and began snapping photos. People were walking between the crops, a few of them openly armed with handguns and a couple with machetes. This was by far the craziest thing I had ever seen. That's when I noticed a few familiar faces sat at the table on the far side of the warehouse. It was the missing kids. I thought they were involved in the operation, but clearly they had no consensual part in the unfolding events as they were tied to the chairs. A guard was sat with them. My phone camera couldn't get a good enough image from where I was. I had to get down the stairs and get a shot down one of the guards' walkways between the crops. This was so fucked. I inched my way to the bottom of the steps. Metal railing, doing nothing to conceal me. Luckily, I was in a corner and there was another wall enclosing me, so I had 3 walls around me. So I was relatively obscured. But if any of the guards decided to go to the roof, I was screwed. I had to do this quickly. I reached the bottom and laid probe between the bottom of the stairs. I could almost get the shot. I would have to be out in the open for a fraction of a second to pull this off. I waited for the guards patrolling the crops to be away from the stairwell. I stood and quickly took multiple photos with my phone, only a fraction of which were actually in focus. I then dove back into my hiding place, doing my best I could to keep my panicked breathing quiet. I'd actually done it. I began the slow, treacherous ascent up the stairs when I heard footsteps approaching. I sped my crawl, reaching the door and closing it carefully. I went around the corner from the roof access door, thankfully, back in the night breeze. I heard the guard walk out onto the roof. Clearly, the door alarm was never properly connected anyways. I heard a lighter click and more footsteps ascending the stairwell. A couple of guards were stood at my only escape from my current position, talking. I took out my phone again and began recording a video. I couldn't see the guards, but what they were saying was the important part. At this point in time, I can't disclose what the guards were conversing about, but I will reveal everything eventually. I was still stood there, frozen in terror at this point. I had to get off the roof. The building was 2 stories tall and the ground below me was concrete, but there was an open dumpster around the back of the roof access. Only problem was the back wall of the roof access was flush against the wall of the warehouse. I would have to jump and hope against hope that I would land in the dumpster. I replaced my phone in my pocket and steeled myself. I jumped. I felt a rush of fear and indescribable euphoria as I fell through the air. It was strange. All I could think of was, I'm gonna die. But the feel of falling was almost thrilling. I hit the dumpster with a soft thump. It was loud, but much less so than my likely screams if I'd have hit the concrete. Yet on my landing, I felt a sharp pain in my foot. Tears in my eyes, I bit down on my hand to suppress a scream of pain. It was twisted at the very least. I crawled out of the dumpster, smelling quite a bit like Jacob. Maybe his smell was a vocational issue. Regardless, I limped my way back to the car. I'd actually pulled this shit off. Fucking hell. I got back in my car and painfully drove home. Despite the pain in my foot, I decided it would be best if I had a shower first. Showing up stinking like a homeless person at A&E wouldn't do me any favors. It didn't look broken, but it was still pretty goddamn swollen. I also had bruises up my right leg and arm from where I had fallen. This would be harder to explain. I plugged my phone into my laptop and sent the pictures and video over. I saved them in multiple places just in case. Putting my phone back into my pocket, I returned to my car and drove to A&E. It took about 2 hours to get seen, and I was sat there, my nerves going all sorts of insane for an innumerable amount of reasons. When the doctor eventually saw me, she wrapped it up and gave me meds. Turned out I had a pretty bad sprain, and I have to go very easy on my foot to avoid tendon damage. I mean, considering the fall, it could have ended up much worse. Once back home, I sent everything to Matt. I awaited his reply with bated breath. You actually did it. Holy fuck. I didn't actually expect to find those kids, let alone a fucking weed farm. Good work, Ryan. I'll have to send the money across for a few accounts or payments to avoid suspicion. Get back to me with the details when you can. And that I did. Sure enough, the final sum was 5,000 pounds on the dot. This was insane. If this information was worth so much, then what the hell was I getting myself into? I decided I'd try and get some rest. I'd done my part, and I'd got my pay. I had to rest my foot, and lying low was the best move for me, all things considered. But thoughts race around my mind. I was in for a long, sleepless night. And that's the end of it for now. As you can probably guess, the people I had to get permission from were my family. As much, I felt I could have left that part out. Also, need to detail everything that happened so I can't be suspected of being anywhere I wasn't. I need to compile the next part carefully so I don't implicate people who weren't involved, as these posts have managed to attract attention from authorities, believe it or not. And with the information I'm releasing today, don't be surprised if I don't post again. Like you've all been saying, I'm either insane or extremely brave, and bravery is not one of my strong points. Until next time, if there is one, I'm in for what could be my last night of no sleep. And finally, we'll move on to Part 5, the finale. Hi, so I'm not Ryan. He told me if he wasn't back by this time, I had to upload this for him. He told me not to read it because it'd be the reason he's missing. So, yeah, dramatic, right? I have no idea what I'm posting, or why, but I guess it's significant. He's been missing a couple of days, and cops have a lead on him, so I hope this was worth it. I've been alone in my flat for days. I hadn't been to college or work. I was too focused on finding out what was going on with that warehouse. Me and Matt had both been looking into it, and it seems to belong to the entrepreneur whose kid was missing, and, ironically, held in that very same warehouse. We guessed he was being held ransom. Matt had just finished creating his final report to be posted on the forum, but strangely, he stressed the police shouldn't know and everyone should remain anonymous, which is very uncharacteristic for him. When I pressed him for reasoning, he just said, because this is not a normal case. I'm worried for him. Also, I think I'm being followed. I keep seeing the same people in the street and they hurry off when I notice them. He sent me the final draft of the report with all the names intact, just in case, as well. I'm getting seriously worried. In other news, Jacob contacted me about a job coming up soon. I'll have to get back to him. I do owe him after all. What me and Matt have worked out so far is that someone is blackmailing the police inspector, the mayor, and a local entrepreneur who owns the warehouse where all the kids are being kept. The mayor's kids were killed invading the elderly couple homes, and the elderly couple were killed by someone else, probably for knowing too much. The warehouse was being used as a drug farm, with the drugs being sold on the deep web and couriered by the deep web couriers. This is pretty much everything we could work out. Based on questioning Lara, it seems the two kids who were killed by the old lady used to run the business, but with them dead, I have no idea who's in charge. And now the old lady's gone too. I can't ask her what she knows. But the basement, maybe there was something there that could help me. I never wanted to go back to that fucking farm, but my options were running thin, and this seems like the only way of getting any more useful info. I got in my car and drove to the all-familiar route to the farm. As I broke from the suburbs, I could see construction work was sprawling into the old couple's land at a faster rate. A couple of the first houses seemed complete, the windows illuminating the night sky. I felt sorry for them. Even I had thought the old lady guilty, but she was just a victim the entire time. I still have no idea what her motive was, though. I approached the barn in my car, driving up the old dirt road as I had those times before. I killed the engine, and I got out. Something was wrong. The barn looked like it had been invaded. The doors that were still on their hinges were wide open, and things were strewn everywhere. I didn't like this at all. I approached cautiously, peering through an open doorway in the side of the barn towards the hatch in the back corner. I heard a distant conversation. I entered slowly, positioning myself behind the rusted tractor, which also seemed to have been torn apart in search of something. I saw light emitting from the hatch, the conversation louder now I was closer. I crept to the top of the hatch, almost prone. Looking down the stairs, I saw movement. I had to get them out of there somehow. Perhaps there was a fuse box in the farmhouse I could trip. Begrudgingly, I slowly moved away from my position and began the grueling walk towards the farmhouse, taking the route me and Jacob took back when we set up those cameras. A chill shot up my spine at the realization that the old lady was dead. Her husband too, which was a shame. He seemed really nice. Only a true gentleman offers his finest china to a guest. I reached the shrub line and hopped over it. The farmhouse was a state. The fire resulting from the gas explosion had taken off half of the second floor, and there were burn marks covering the entire thing. I approached the back door, flung off its hinges. There was police tape across it. Ducking down, I stood in the kitchen of the farmhouse. I was in a crime scene, and the place I most dreaded to be simultaneously. This was creepy to say the least. The ceiling had caved in the living room across from the kitchen. There was no way I was getting up in there. The gun safe was sitting in the living room, half embedded into the floor. It was also covered in tape. It seemed the police had tried to force it open to no avail. This was so fucked up. I saw a door in the kitchen that seemed untouched by the fire, and I opened it. It contained stairs leading down. Another basement? These guys sure liked keeping things below ground, including the dead bodies of their invaders. I descended carefully, flicking a switch to turn on the dim filament bulb that scarcely lit the room below. There were shelves full of dried foods, washing powders, cleaning supplies, even a wine rack. Matt was right when he said the farmers made a lot of money off their land. This place was more than well stocked. I saw the fuse box next to the stairwell and another box next to it, both wall-mounted. I opened the fuse box and browsed. Homemade labels listed different rooms of the house, including barn basement. I had it. Nice. The other box had me intrigued. It had a keyhole. I looked around in the basement for a key. The shelves were slightly dusty and contained nothing special. That's if you don't count dried cereal and count canned goods as special. After a good few minutes, I spotted that the wall seated against the staircase had planks that looked quite loose. I tried a few of them and found that the third from the left pulled away with ease. And sure enough, there was a crawl space under there. Removing more planks revealed a tunnel under the stairs, as well as a shelf with a key and a small safe on it. The couple sure had a lot of things to keep safe. I took the key and tried it on the box mounted on the wall. It fit. Inside, there seemed to be spare keys for all the different lockable doors of the house, including the hatch in the barn. There was also a slip of paper with safe combinations. Gun safe, 553-011-71911. Gun safe ammo, 553-011-91711. Money, Dad's date of birth, and our 50th anniversary. I found the last one particularly heartwarming and sad. They'd been together for 50 years. It was a real shame they had to get mixed up in all this crap. I took the spare key for the hatch in the combination list. I ascended the stairs once more. What I was about to do was incredibly illegal, and I was panicking to suit. Those people in the basement could be armed, and I didn't want to take any risks. Also, if the gun wasn't on the scene, the old lady could never be accused of murder. I'm glad I decided to wear woolen gloves to fight the cold that day, because otherwise, my prints would be all over the place. I opened the safe and saw the shotgun laying there. Was I seriously going to do this? It was an under and over barrel. The barrel was long and it looked heavy. After picking it up, I realized it was heavier than it looked. I'm amazed that old lady could carry it, honestly. I pulled a latch on the side and the barrel swung down, revealing the place to slot the shotgun cartridges. There was also a safety adjacent to the latch, which I left securely in the safe position. I unlocked the ammo compartment and pulled out the only box of cartridges in there. There were 12 in the box. I placed the box in my backpack, taking out 2 and loading them into the gun, flipping back the barrel afterwards. I pulled back the hammer, safety still engaged. I locked the safe back up and replaced the combinations in the box in the wall in the basement. Closing and locking it, I remembered the crawl space in the tunnel inside it. I re-entered the crawl space and looked into the tunnel. It was tall enough for a person to walk through unhindered. Did the couple dig this themselves? I saw a crude sign nailed on the wall, saying, to barn. I hesitated. I took out my flashlight, putting down the shotgun to free up my hands. There's no way I could shoot that thing while holding my flashlight, and there was no way I was going down that tunnel without it. Then I remembered the garage. It had to be full of stuff, right? Maybe there were some zip ties or something. Begrudgingly, I left the shotgun in the crawl space and ascended the stairs, leaving the farmhouse and approaching the garage. Remembering when I hid there so long ago now, that's when I noticed the sensor I placed there was still there. Did these things record footage? I hoped so. Its battery was seemingly dead. I placed it in my bag, hoping I'd be able to get footage off of it when I got home. I scavenged around the overall garage and grabbed a few loose zip ties. I returned to the basement and tip-tied my flashlight to the side of the shotgun's barrels. I quickly dashed to the fuse box and flipped the fuse marked barn basement and began walking down the tunnel. I was sure the people in there hadn't discovered the tunnel, otherwise they wouldn't have come in through the locked hatch. I held the shotgun in front of me, clicking the safety off, trembling lightly in the cold. Eventually I saw a door. That familiar smell disgusting me once again. I opened it and saw... Makes me want to vomit just recalling it. There were 2 rotting bodies of the attackers in the bathtub in the room. This was the most fucked up thing I'd seen in my life. I fought back vomiting as I undid the lock on the other door in the small room and opened it to see the same room me and Jacob had entered before. I aimed the shotgun at the workbench, regretting the fact that I'd zip-tied the flashlight to the barrel as I awkwardly illuminated the desk. I pulled open a drawer on the bench to see it full of binders. Each one had a person's name on it. There was one for each of the influential figures and their children. I grabbed them up and placed them in my bag. I had photos of the board at home. Then the lights suddenly shot to life. Those men had found the fuse box and untripped the fuse. I looked around to see cans of petrol on a couple of corners of the room. The stench of the corpses was clearly overwhelming the smell of petrol. That's when I heard the shouts coming from the tunnel. I wouldn't let those people use this information. I ascended the stairs, took aim down the steps with my shotgun, and fired. A single barrel erupted, firing buckshot into the basement and igniting the petrol. The recoil threw me onto my ass, and painfully and unceremoniously. I clambered back to my feet and ran to my car, throwing the shotgun into the backseat footwell. I started the engine and got the fuck out of there, and as I was leaving, I could see the fire spreading to the rest of the barn. It almost felt like closure seeing the place burn down. I got home and began dissecting the sensor. I found an SD card inside, which I plugged into my laptop. It was full of video files with timestamps and their names. I scoured through the more recent ones, looking to find the person who killed the elderly couple. Sure enough, there was a video of a hooded man pulling some kind of reel out of the back door of the building. He stood in view as he pressed some kind of switch on the reel, and the second floor exploded. He then flicked another switch, and the reel seemingly coiling up the trailing wire before running out of the camera's view, away from the crime. I had proof that the couple were murdered. Now all I needed was the people behind this all. I looked through the old lady's binders. They were all extensive, detailing the lives of people up until the day her house was invaded. I'm not going to detail all the contents, but from reading them, I established the entrepreneur was working with the 2 kids before the kids invaded her house and she shot them. I had everything I needed. I used a scanner app on my phone to slowly and laboriously scan all the binders and archived all the evidence that I collected, as well as the logs I had been keeping. The same logs I've been reading to make these posts, using WinRAR, set a password, and sent both archive and password to Matt. No response. I waited a week. Nothing. I messaged him repeatedly asking him about it. Even Jacob emailed me asking if I'd heard anything from him, but nothing. After 2 weeks had passed, I get a message. It reads below. Ryan, if you're reading this, I can't post the latest case and can't reply because I'm physically unable to. This message was coded to be sent as a failsafe if I didn't log into my computer for 2 weeks. This means I'm likely kidnapped, injured, or dead. It's a risk I accepted when I started doing this as a job, and I quickly saw the risk related to this line of work, as I'm sure you have. With this message will be all the information I've gathered on any unreleased cases I have, including the one you've been helping me with. Also attached is the email and password for a PayPal account with a substantial sum of money in it. Consider it your payment/severance package. I've also attached a post I'd like you to make public revealing my disappearance. It's a bit of an autobiography of my work I'd been planning to post when I retire, but it looks like it's early retirement for me. Please release the case publicly as well as any of my unreleased ones. Please send copies of the cases to the relevant authorities. You're a good kid. If you have sense, you will never work on the fucking deep web again. This place is cursed. Good luck, Matt. I sat there in shock. What the fuck was I supposed to do now? I messaged Jacob. He'd received a similar message, but he asked him to destroy all traces of his work with Matt. Was I in danger too? I recalled the feeling I was being followed. This was so messed up. I compiled both of our evidence into a single archive. I printed all the evidence and placed the bulky resultant pages into a binder of my own and marked it Farmhouse. I had tears in my eyes. I may have worked for Matt, but he was also my friend. I posted, as he asked, linking the archive and listing the password as evidence. I wondered how I was going to tell the authorities. Then I remembered Sergeant Church. He knew something wasn't right about the death of the farmers. It was in the early hours of the morning when I drove down to the station. I had removed the shotgun from my car prior. I had a USB with me, which contained all the evidence except me stealing the shotgun, instead now detailing how the safe was open upon arrival. I entered and asked to talk with him. I sat in a waiting room for a short while before he came and collected me. With a handshake, I followed him into his office, and I handed him the USB. "What's this?" he asked, his voice filled with trepidation. "It's everything I have on the elderly couple from the farmhouse that burned down. There's more to it. Read through it and it will all make sense. You have to understand that what I'm giving you exposes a lot of crimes. You will likely be hailed as a hero for the data, but I'm handing it to you now under the premise that I'm placed into witness protection. I almost died multiple times getting this shit for you." He stared down with a loom full of confusion and fear. He plugged in the USB and began flicking through the files. "Holy fuck. I need to ask questions. We will use what you say, but nothing will ever go to court mentioning you. Understand?" I nodded. He pressed a button on a device on his desk. As he flipped through the files, he would occasionally stop and ask a question. I would reply curtly and with detail. He closed our interaction with a short interview. He told me officers could escort me home if I felt unsafe. I told him I'd be okay and asked what would happen from there. He said an investigation team would have to verify everything and rule me out as a conspiring perp. I nodded and left with another handshake. I drove home, hid the shotgun and cartridges in a bin bag, taking the bin bag to the roof and hiding it in an AC unit that was about as decrepit as the burnt-out farmhouse. Over the next year, the police conversed with me and built up the case. They raided the drug farm and rescued the kids. Their parents all opened about the blackmail. The entrepreneur behind it was also arrested for so many crimes. I need a new post just to list them. And that brings me to the present. The entrepreneur is getting his case reviewed, and some of the evidence has mysteriously disappeared. He stands a chance of being released, which is why I'm posting everything here on Reddit. People need to know what happened. I'm releasing everything so that what Matt died for isn't in vain. I might be going the same way for doing it, but I don't care. This needs to be out here. I was in witness protection, by the way. I had to escape that to make these last posts. That's what I meant when I said I was out of town with friends. My life is at risk, but hopefully, releasing everything will make my pursuers back off, as they have nothing to gain from silencing me. If I don't post again, rest assured I was doing what I loved. With all this dealt with, and some closure, I think I can finally get some sleep. Update. It's Ryan. I am safe. Can't say more today. We'll post more tomorrow. And that, my friends, is where I'm going to leave it. Sorry, Trigger Happy Jay. This is live. I just don't check the chat in the middle of stories because I don't like to interrupt in the middle of them. All of my podcasts, just for future reference, are live. And they do happen, on a live basis. So as long as you're seeing it on a live stream, it is definitely live. However, this will get posted to my channel later, so whether you're watching now live or watching later in the future, I hope you enjoyed these stories. There seems to be 2 more stories linked with this particular series. However, it's running late, and I'd like to get some sleep, so we can cover these stories tomorrow. I have a few more stories about the deep web, and I would love to share them with you. At that, I've got nothing else for you. Be sure to check out my subreddit if you get a chance, or if you find yourself with a horror story that you want to post and have read on this channel. Also, check out my Patreon if you'd like to support me. That'll be in the description below. And other than that, thank you all so much for coming and listening. Thank you for inviting me into your home, your workplace, or wherever you're listening from tonight. And as always, I will see you another night. Sleep well, friends.